The year is 1915. A woman stands at the edge of a Broadway stage, small, barely 5 feet tall, unremarkable by every measure the industry used to judge such things. No connections, no money, no beauty that anyone who mattered had noticed. The Drama Academy had already told her she had no talent and asked her not to return. Hollywood would later examine her screen test and write 4 words meant to close the matter. Acts fine, can't photograph her. They were not trying to be cruel. They were simply stating what seemed obvious. Ruth Gordon did not look like a star. She didn't argue, she didn't petition, she simply continued. For 50 years, the industry tried to contain her and failed. This is the story of how a woman who didn't fit a single mold Hollywood recognized ended up standing at its podium, holding its highest prize at age 72. Ruth Gordon was born in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1896 to a father who believed in discipline and a mother who died when Ruth was 12. Neither event shaped her as decisively as an afternoon in 1914 when she watched an actress named Hazel Dawn perform in a musical called The Pink Lady. She walked out of that theater knowing exactly what she intended to do with her life. The fact that she had no money, no talent she could yet demonstrate, no contacts, and legs bowed enough to compromise her silhouette did not register as obstacles. They registered as logistics. She scraped together enough to enroll at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. At the end of her first year, the director called her into his office and delivered his assessment without apparent difficulty. She showed no signs, he explained, of being suitable for the profession. She would not be invited back. She found other work. She found other stages. Gradually, through sheer accumulated persistence, she found larger ones, Peter Pan on Broadway, then Ethan Frome, then A Doll's House, her name eventually appearing above the title alongside performers the industry considered legends. She learned to dress carefully, to stand at angles that minimized what she considered her most visible liability. Then, in 1921, she decided that managing the problem was insufficient. She consented to a surgery in which both legs were broken and reset. The procedure was covered in the papers. She made jokes about it throughout. Hollywood eventually came, as it came for most successful stage actresses of the era. A screen test was arranged. The results were reviewed. Someone wrote the conclusion in 4 words that were meant to be final. Acts fine. Can't photograph her. They filed the assessment away and moved on. Ruth Gordon did not. Hollywood had decided it didn't want Ruth Gordon in front of its cameras. She responded by walking behind them. In 1942, she married Garson Kanin, writer, director, and by most accounts, one of the sharper minds working in the industry. The partnership was personal and professional in equal measure, and what they built together over the following decade would leave a mark on American cinema that neither a screen test, rejection, nor a casting director's indifference could touch. Their first produced screenplay, A Double Life, was a film noir about an actor whose stage roles began to consume his real identity. Ronald Colman won the Best Actor Oscar for his performance. Gordon and Kanin were nominated for Best Original Screenplay. They lost. They were already writing the next one. The origin of Adam's rib arrived the way the best ideas sometimes do, through someone else's life. A friend's divorce had produced an unlikely chain of events. 2 married lawyers hired to handle the separation had, by the time the case closed, divorced their own spouses and married each other's clients. Gordon and Kanin recognized the architecture of a story immediately. They built around it a comedy about married attorneys on opposite sides of a murder trial, handed it to MGM, and suggested Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy for the leads. The film was sharp, generous to both its characters, and quietly radical in its insistence that a woman's ambitions were as legitimate as a man's, not a concession the script made reluctantly, but a position it held with confidence. That conviction came from somewhere real. Gordon and Kanan were a working couple who understood from direct experience exactly what it cost a woman to be taken seriously in a room full of men. They were nominated again for Best Original Screenplay. They lost again to Sunset Boulevard, which, it must be said, was fair. 22 years passed between Ruth Gordon's last film and her next one. She was not idle. Broadway kept her working, kept her name above titles, earned her a Tony nomination in 1956. But the screen had closed its door quietly, the way institutions do when they've made a decision they don't intend to discuss. Her return came in 1965 in a film called Inside Daisy Clover. She was 69 years old. Natalie Wood, who was starring, had wanted Gordon for the role of her mother against the studio's preference for a more recognizable film name. Wood pushed until the studio relented. It was the kind of loyalty that moves careers, and Gordon rewarded it with the first screen performance that allowed her to be, in any meaningful sense, herself. The roles before had been wives, supportive ones, dutiful ones, Norwegian ones resisting the Nazi occupation, but wives regardless, existing at the edges of stories that belonged to men. Inside Daisy Clover gave her something different, a woman with edges, with eccentricity, with the particular stubborn warmth that Gordon had been carrying through life since Quincy, Massachusetts. The Academy noticed. Her first Oscar nomination arrived at 69. She expected to win. She prepared a dress. She went to the ceremony carrying the quiet certainty of a woman who had waited long enough. Then another name was called. She stood up anyway, caught herself, sat back down. Then she went to the party and told the story on herself until the room was laughing. That capacity to convert humiliation into charm without losing the ambition underneath it was as much a part of her instrument as anything she did on a stage. Roman Polanski called shortly after. He had a neighbor he needed her to play, a busybody, a gossip, a woman who made tea and meddled cheerfully in other people's lives. He did not mention the devil. Horror films do not win Oscars. This is not a recent phenomenon or a modern complaint. It is a law of the industry as reliable as gravity. 1969 was no exception to it. Rosemary's Baby had prompted the predictable responses from censors and conservative groups. The film was called sick, obscene, sleazy. One Los Angeles Times review managed to nominate Ruth Gordon for an Academy Award and condemn the picture she was in within the same paragraph, apparently without recognizing the contradiction. What the review recognized, even if it couldn't fully explain it, was that Gordon's performance existed at a strange remove from the film surrounding it. Minnie Castevet does not scream. She does not transform. She does not descend into the kind of stylized, hollowed-out terror that marks a performance as belonging to the horror genre and consequently marks it as something Academy voters can comfortably overlook. She makes tea. She gives her neighbors dessert. She reaches out during conversation as though physically pulling people toward her, a gesture so characteristic of Gordon herself that it reads less like acting than like nature expressing itself in a sinister context. The malevolence is there. It simply arrives wearing a house coat and a cheerful expression. Her fellow nominees that year were formidable by any measure. Sandra Locke, 21 years old, making her film debut, Lynn Carlin, discovered across a hallway by John Cassavetes. Estelle Parsons, the previous year's winner, nominated again for Rachel. Kay Medford, overshadowed in Funny Girl by the gravitational pull of Barbra Streisand, but present and legitimate nonetheless. Against this field, Gordon won, not because the Academy had suddenly warmed to horror, but because they had run out of reasons to keep saying no to a woman who had been making the case for herself since 1915. Eventually, the truth catches up with the institution. It just sometimes takes 50 years. The Drama Academy sent her home. Hollywood couldn't photograph her. The studios gave her husbands to stand beside and called it a career. For 50 years, Ruth Gordon collected rejections the way other women collected credits, and she converted every one of them into fuel. She stood at the Oscar podium in 1969, having started in 1915. The math alone is staggering. What it doesn't capture is the quality of will required to cross that distance, the surgeries, the silent decades, the parties where she made herself the punchline rather than the victim, the dresses bought in expectation of prizes that went to someone else. She described her own life once in terms borrowed from mythology: trouble, terror, agony, misery, fright, and then something happens and it all comes out right.